Action item is going to be the East Bay Bridge Vision Plan. That's Michelle's.
Okay. Good evening, members of the Planning Commission. I'm Michelle DeUzen with the Economic Development and Housing Department with the city. The 42-acre excuse me, East Bay Bridge Center was developed in the 1990s by Catellis Development Corporation on a site that had been previously occupied or used as a railroad yard and a truck depot. It currently contains 450,000 square feet of retail, including major retail such as Home Depot, Sports Authority, CompUSA, and it also has 220 dwelling units, which are contained in the Bridgecourt apartments, which run along the northern edge of the property. The area around the East Bay Bridge has changed dramatically since the project first opened. It was initially somewhat of a retail island in a predominantly industrial area, but now land uses around the center have evolved to include residential, retail, and light industrial. Improvements to the center are originally contemplated by the Community Preservation Task Force to evaluate the project's conditions of approval in regard to tree planting. Although it was later determined that the project did comply with this particular requirement, the evaluation generated an interest to undertake a wider effort to improve the appearance and function of the center and to better integrate it into the changing environment around it. In response to that, the agency retained the services of SCFM Design Studio to evaluate the center, and they produced a feasibility study or a vision plan that is the result of that. This feasibility study suggests two main categories of redevelopment potential for the site. One are cosmetic improvements to the existing center, as well as development opportunities primarily on surface lots that can be used to bring additional density to the center, as well as to have the center better reflect the development pattern of some of the surrounding areas. The improvements that you'll hear discussed are not necessarily cumulative. They can be implemented on a discrete basis, in phases, or as part of a complete comprehensive plan. And as you listen to the presentation from SCFM on this, what staff is hoping to receive from the Commission is comment and direction regarding this proposal related to its design intent. So with that, I'd like to introduce Satish Mahindra from SCFM.
Good evening, members of the Commission and staff and visitors. I wanted to, not sure how do I switch?
You switch.
Oh, okay.
So, you want to use that portable?
I'll use the
Onto
portable
There you
one.
go.
Is on. As Michelle mentioned, 42-acre site. I think it's not easy to comprehend the scale of this, but we did a kind of a quick exercise. In the east-west direction, if you go from San Pablo Avenue all the way up to the western edge of Expo, the property is approximately 10 city blocks. So it's a very large piece of property. And as Michelle mentioned, it's smack in the middle, of course, and a lot of activity has started to happen all around. What you're going to see here, I will not go through every page of the vision plan, but just to give you a general sense, we have a section that covers the history of the project boundaries, and its existing conditions. The recent developments, that's the next section, and that talks about the various residential as well as commercial developments that have started to happen around. And these, just wanted to add, are the ones that are listed here, the commercial, residential, and hotel, are all developments that have come about after this project was built. In the critical analysis, I think we talk about what the challenges are, and one of the main challenges is going to be that the current users are the big box users. They have long leases and all kinds of other encumbrances in terms of parking requirements that they expect the landlord to meet. Just to put this in perspective, out of the 450,000 square feet that is here, if you leave aside the residential, 95% of that consists of big boxes. It's only 5% of the space is what we would normally call, what the industry calls general retail. So Starbucks and a little other shops like that, they constitute a very minuscule amount, which is indicative of how much, what kind of challenge, of course, these plans will face from tenants like Home Depot, CompUSA, and so on. We have taken that into account, and what we've come up with here for the owners of the site to consider and for the city to consider in supporting them is two kinds of improvements. One are cosmetic enhancements that are minor. Probably most of them can be implemented without the approval of the big box tenants. And those are improvements that are often done by property owners like this over a period of time when they see the use patterns evolve and change. The second set, what I like to call those sort of the cosmetic improvements are sort of the first phase, you can say, that can happen anytime. The development opportunities, and we're presenting 4 of them, A, B, C, D. As Michelle said, they can happen in any order. Their effect is going to be, of course, if each one is reinforcing the other, but they do not have to precede any particular development because it's a large enough site that presents different opportunities here. They have been designed so that they will have minimal impact on the big box tenants. The next logical step, and we mentioned that in this vision plan only in conclusion, is further continuation of this increasing density, intensifying it, and that could happen in the long term. So this is a midterm sort of development opportunity in the next 10, from now to maybe 10, 15 years. And then the logical extension will be the further densification and perhaps at that time relocation or replacement of the big box tenants. If you see, so this, I went through most of this here, so I'll skip that. But just to add that the existing floor area ratio, it's a very low density development right now. It's 0.36. And in fact, that's because of the residential. If you only take the commercial portion, that's even lower. So the large expanses of parking lot and single-story commercial buildings. There are vast. The center is overparked, and there's no question about that. And it's several reasons. I think it's overparked to begin with, but when Expo came along and in place of the previous tenant, Expo has a different business model, and so you cannot apply the same 4 or 5 cars per 1,000 square feet. They do not need that. They don't have that volume of customers. And that's no reflection of their success or not, but that's just their business model. So I think as a result of that, and another sort of obvious anecdotal observation I think we all have had is the fact that the Home Depot's parking lot in front often has carpet sales and trucks are parked in empty parking spaces. That's indicative that the tenant also thinks that there is excess parking here. The residential development does hold the edge along 40th Street in a very strong way. However, where I think there's certainly need for improvement is that the sort of token amount of retail space that they have incorporated within the ground floor is certainly was commendable. However, the design of that space is something that could certainly use improvement because the look in various locations, the look of that is so so much like the rest of the residential units that it's hard, if the GameStop sign was not here, you couldn't tell. You might think this is just the entrance to residential. So there is no, the retail certainly gets a sort of a second class, you can say, presence. And some of the locations like this, as you can see, have not been fully utilized. So we came up with a whole list of cosmetic improvements, and I won't go through every one of them, but they basically range from improving the entry points, which I just mentioned, where the residential buildings are, improving the intersection of San Pablo and 40th, where those buildings, in our opinion, unfortunately, are of a scale and texture, the block, that they get lost, and they almost mimic the big box tenants with the concrete block appearance, that they don't, it doesn't certainly, these shops don't relate architecturally to what generally happens on a main street. And so the fact that they seem like little satellites of these big box tenants, as opposed to relating to their neighbors, whether it's Ardante or other buildings around there. We are also recommending some improvements in the short term that would, without changing the parking lot dramatically, would add some landscaping. The area clearly is in need of some shade. Plaza areas, this is one of the larger of the cosmetic improvements we're suggesting is that we've taken an area which we think is the best sort of space, outdoor public space within the entire center, which is over by the Home Depot's garden shop and the Starbucks and so on. We think there's potential of integrating that and also then linking it to the rest of the city in the north through a pedestrian connection. So those are roughly the cosmetic suggestions, and I'll just quickly walk you through. Here is a picture of the existing buildings on 40th, looking sort of southwest, and so here are some of the suggestions. Without altering in a major way, or without renovating the buildings, we could do a minimal renovation where you start tying the retail stores to more to what's happening in its immediate neighborhood, and sort of downplay its concrete block sort of appearance, which people related to big box tenants, which have no windows in the sides and so on. Some of the entrances here again, this being the block, we're suggesting that there can be cosmetic improvements made to improve, it'll not only improve the appearance at the entrance to this site, but also it would help, I think, the retailers that are trying to make their presence felt at those intersections. This is this area here, and what we're suggesting is that it be redesigned as perhaps as a speed table in this area, so that it's an awkward kind of crossing, vehicular crossing right now, and there's a lot of confusing pedestrian movements and vehicular movements, and we think that since this road does not go through to the south, it just goes to a loading area, there's very little traffic going south here. In any case, we connect this, extend this plaza, and we're suggesting that a kiosk-like structure be built at the northeast corner of the garden shop, and they could even be related to the garden flowers and the plants and so on that are sold at Home Depot, so we can get them to become more of a present this as a front rather than just turning a back with the grill that they have right now. That would really help, I think, this whole area. We are also suggesting improvements to this road here, where we would take off the perpendicular parking on this side, widen this, having a green buffer, and creating this pedestrian connection and strengthening it from what exists right now, making Horton more of a true road as opposed to the way it is right now, which looks like you're entering a parking lot. And that's what it could look like with this element anchoring this corner here. So it would connect, and paving would go right across. You still will be able to drive through all the places we drive right now, except the pedestrians will have the first sort of primary right of movement in these places. These are different views. This is looking back from the circular store, let's say, which is the corner of Home Depot, looking back with a arbor that will take you back to the north of the project. And here is looking from the west side at the gazebo-like structure and of course the activity here. Landscape improvements, we're suggesting, knowing very well that these are suggestions, these cannot be made as requirements because they were not part of the original approval. We are being sensitive to suggesting those landscape improvements, knowing that they'll be rather expensive for them to do, given the nature of the site and when one excavates, how one has to deal with the hazardous materials and so on, is we're limiting it to places where the landscaping will have more than the value of just the landscaping. We've noticed that some of the islands that are closest to the building, to the driving aisles in front of, let's say, Home Depot, they present a problem to motorists because the cars pulling out in the first row, people always like to wait for that car to pull out. That creates a lot of congestion. So we're thinking that can be eliminated, and those made larger, the first two spaces, so that one, it'll make the traffic flow better on this street, and second, it'll provide us more landscaping. And then in the middle areas, we are clustering landscaping so they would have an impact, maximum impact of providing shade. So it's somewhat the opposite of sprinkling a parking lot with lots of trees, which we think would be a cost-prohibitive proposition for them. And what we're taking is a more bold approach where we get limited areas but do have large trees.
So is that then, is the entire site a capped site, or is it just something that still needs additional cleanup?
Well, it may need additional cleanup once you penetrate and try to go deep enough that so you can bring new soil and proper soil to put the landscaping in. The other suggestions include how to deal with the large expanses of concrete walls that are there. There are a few areas where I think the north side of Michael's, for example, has nice landscaping growing, but there are many other areas where there is no landscaping and the walls are rather bare. So we're suggesting that, now this by the way, these are not there, they're sketched in. From a distance, they almost look like they were here. Well, we're suggesting simple, without altering the parking ratio, there are areas where we can add vertical landscaping, so to minimize the impact of the large walls, and also be more playful in places where we can actually have, we can treat landscape as wall art, essentially, where we could get artists involved and come up with structures and train vines so that they form rather dramatic shapes and cast shadows on these walls. So, and here's a suggestion again of the Michael's side where we could have murals added and Michael's would be a good tenant to have a mural added to for the kind of use they are for the hobbyists and so on. Moving on to the development option along 40th Street, and you would still have entrance to Expo in this location. All of these, of course, need a lot further development, but what I wanted to conclude by showing you sort of what's the premise behind all of this is your existing condition, and we have screened off the buildings. What we're only showing you is where there's activity at the street level. So you can see how sporadic these are. This is the Expo entrance, and then several hundred feet away is the Toys R Us next entrance and things like that. Little edge here and there. What we're starting to see, this will be our development option A. What would happen? This would be B, this would be C, and this would be D. This is sort of the cumulative effect we're trying to create. Of course, we are hoping that after D, as Charlie mentioned, when further development, it could be many years away, but you could develop further this fabric, continually increase this neighborhood of streets and active streets, not just streets for cars, further on towards this area. So this is, I think, we haven't explored this, but that would require looking at a relocation or redesign or replacement of these large big box tenants. And I think with that, maybe I'll turn over to Michelle and we can both answer any questions you might have. Thanks.
Thanks, Satish.
I'll just briefly answer the question with regard to economics. As I mentioned in my opening statement, the purpose of this vision study was to do an analysis of what the possibilities were for the center for greater density as well as just updating. And at the time, the center was, or Catellus, the center developer, all of its holdings was purchased by a company called Prologis a few years, maybe about a year and a half, 2 years ago. Prologis is an industrial landowner, and so we had thought that they weren't really the right entity to redevelop the project. However, Catellus has been reformed as a new entity under Prologis, and they're going to be doing the same type of development that they had done in the past, which was infill mixed use. So this is sort of right up their alley. We have presented this to the Catellus representative, and as Satish indicated, they are interested in it. They want to update the center, but in terms of the existing tenants, they have these long-term leases. They signed them; they were market rate. Now they're basically not market rate, and they're doing well, so they don't have a lot of financial incentive to update their, to pay for updating their stores or to pay for it via rent increases. So in order for Catellus to be interested in doing that, they would need to get some additional capital through the redevelopment of their site. So they are interested in that because they realize that the center does need updating, but they were strapped for ways to redo it unless there would be ways for them to generate additional cash. So we've had those discussions, and what we're doing now is getting input from the agency and the Planning Commission to see what do you think of these designs. This is all very conceptual, and this is probably not in the end exactly what's going to go on the ground, but to give ideas and to see what you think about it. Are there issues such as what Commissioner Martin mentioned about the interface between the residential, and that's sort of what we're getting at tonight.
Well, why have you left out the bottom corner of the property where the Best Buy building is, and there's a pet store and a...
That's not part of East Bay Bridge.
In Oakland.
It's in Oakland, but
part of it's in Oakland anyway.
but that's not part of the East Bay Bridge project.
There is a
But you're doing
joint,
a general schematic plan. Why wouldn't you include it?
because there is a joint powers authority that is comprised of the cities of Oakland and Emeryville that has jurisdiction over the East Bay Bridge Center. So even for the portions of the center that are outside of Emeryville, we still have some authority over it through the JPA that we've entered into with Oakland. Now, any of this, even the Emeryville part, couldn't be done without reconvening the JPA and having them bless it. But the Best Buy and the Extended Stay America and the Office Depot and the Pet Club are outside of the area of the JPA. Those are entirely within the jurisdiction of the City of Oakland, and we don't really have much to say about that property.
Does
That's why
Catellus
it wasn't
own that,
included.
too?
No, they don't.
Michelle, what's the average long-term lease for these properties?
I don't know. I haven't asked them what their leases are.
Long-term, does that mean 5 years? Does it mean 10 years?
No, big boxes don't do that. They do, 20 years
plus
with multiple options after that. Yeah, big boxes.
20 years as of 1995 or whatever.
Right.
Then they often have options.
10-year options, and they have multiple options. So
Well,
their plan is to stay.
what about, all of these schemes involve reducing parking. What do the leases say in regard to parking?
That's some of the issues those are some of the details that need to be worked out with
Has
Catellus.
that been discussed at all?
Yeah, some of those issues are.
So they do have an
They're-
obligation
yeah.
to provide the number of parking places that are currently there.
And some of those are addressed through, for instance, over at the Expo, some of that is addressed through the structured parking. And if additional parking is needed, we'll be looking at structures. But we'll have to look into the details. This is sort of a first blush. Catellus has it, and we have it. And those type of issues will be coming up more.
Won't
as
the
this goes
parking
refined.
structures compensate for so that you
So
don't
there isn't a
lose
net
parking?
loss.
Right.
Right.
I think with parking, a couple of things. One, we feel, given the uses, if a developer were to come today to develop the site and know these are my tenants, they would probably put less parking than there is right now. And evidence of that is, of course, just how vacant the Expo parking lot is, and also how vacant the parking lot often is, the areas close to residential in front of Home Depot and so on, because they find it quite convenient to use it for carpet sales. They take over the whole parking. I can't think of any other Home Depot in the Bay Area that can afford to do that, but here they have excess parking. That's number one. But the other is so we think that we can do some improvements without triggering structured parking, because that it would, by just reducing the ratio of the current parking. But beyond that, there would definitely be structured parking, and you saw that us proposing both at the north, the south, east, and the west end of.
But your development plan includes a lot of smaller retail spaces.
Right.
And currently on San Pablo Avenue, every new building has been required to have retail spaces on the ground floor, and a huge percentage of them are empty and have
Right.
not been rentable. So why would we want to provide more of that space?
Well, I think.
I mean, it looks
Yeah,
nice to see
I think you're
outdoor
right,
cafe.
but I think that I think you could turn that argument sort of upside down by saying, if you do have more, there's a greater chance that the ones you have, Avalon, Adante, who are right now only one-sided retail, there's a certain critical mass you need to have to get an activity sort of going, and we are also hoping. There have been some discussions about the supermarket, the Safeway that owns the Pack and Save. Is it Pack and Save?
Yes.
That I think the demographics and the time is come where maybe that becomes a full-line grocery store. In which case, I think it could. That would be indication that the critical mass is developing.
Well, it
So-
is a full-line grocery store.
I'm sorry?
It is a full-line grocery store.
It is, but I mean, a grocery store that is
Non-warehouse.
non-warehouse, a more
Upper
conventional
scale.
grocery store.
Yeah.
And
A
to
regular
also,
Safeway.
I'm sorry. To also make the point about the retail in East Bay Bridge actually does quite well. So adding additional, part of that, a lot of that has to do with the parking. But, so it builds on the idea of creating a retail node around an existing successful retail center and building on that. So that's, and hopefully the idea that will then also spread to the avenue as it goes farther.
If I could chime in with another comment, maybe Michelle can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that big property owners like Catellus, who are in the business of running shopping centers, have marketing divisions and a whole list of contacts with various retail people that they can hook up with, whereas when the smaller stores along San Pablo Avenue are owned by individual property owners who are not in the retail business, it's a ground floor use of what is essentially a residential project. What I've heard, at least from Madison Marquette and TMG, who have Bay Street and the Marketplace, that they've got all these contacts with retail developers, and also they can afford to keep a store empty for a while, maybe while they're looking for exactly the right tenant, whereas a smaller property owner can't do that kind of thing. So that's
But also, I think some of the retail space, not all, but quite, and this is not just Emeryville, I've noticed in other cities, it was developed by, as Charlie says, residential developers. They don't understand retail, so even design-wise, it's a second-class space because that developer didn't have much faith in any case, so it's self-fulfilling prophecy. Dante, for example, the retail space looks like it's a garage. It's such a low height. So it's not surprising that they're not very attractive to retailers.
Michelle, can you describe the incentives? You've used that word several times. We're talking about the city handing them funds or doing these
well, the city-
cosmetic improvements?
Yeah, the city would
or-
need to, I didn't realize I mentioned incentives. But what we presented to the agency was a possibility. We have a facade grant program on San Pablo Avenue, if you're aware of that.
Yes.
And one of the things that we were considering doing, that we asked the agency to consider, although it was a study session, so they didn't give us any real direction on it, was possibly helping to fund the cosmetic improvements through the facade program if we extended it through, if the developer undertook the development opportunities. So we wouldn't fund them wholly, but it would be a way to partially help update the existing buildings while they undertook the larger development project. And that was one of the things we looked at. There's a variety of things we could do. You know, we could do an owner participation agreement that could have other stipulations of affordable housing and that sort of thing. But again, you know, it's in order for us to really hammer out what the incentives would be, we would have to understand what the project was going to be.
And then in terms of land use, we're talking about additional entitlement and zoning changes to facilitate these reuse?
That would be handled by the JPA.
right. This is a PUD, although I guess my understanding is that PUDs were handled a little bit differently when this project was originally approved, because they aren't shown on this particular PUD is not shown on our zoning map like other PUDs are. But it is a PUD, and it would either require an amendment to the existing PUD or a new PUD. And in either case, it would have to be approved by the JPA, of which I believe 6 of you are members. I'm not sure which 6, but it's 6 planning commissioners from Emeryville and 7 from Oakland. And then there's an appeal board, which includes 5 Emeryville council members and 4 Oakland council members.
Curious, because in all my years on the commission, I think I'm the long-term commissioner now, 6. We've never designated anyone on the JPA.
Well, you don't
I'm
designate
not on it.
you don't designate them. The city council does,
Oh.
and there is
They didn't bother to tell us.
in the city's roster of boards and commissions, the JPA is in there, and it lists who the commissioners are that are on it. I couldn't tell you who it is off the top of my head, but
So the vision that has been presented tonight, or whatever refined form of it becomes, is that then an amendment to the plan that the city's going to try to facilitate for this applicant? I mean, we're talking land use changes here.
it wouldn't be until the applicant came forward with a specific proposal that we would reconvene the JPA and ask them to consider it.
Basically, the city's putting the card out there and saying, come on board, and we're going to work with you to try to facilitate this. Okay.
And it could find its way into our general plan update as well. And I would say, I don't believe, city attorney might want to kick me under the table here, but I don't, the general plan guidelines of the state allow you to include areas that are outside of your city if they're related to your planning. So I think it would be perfectly reasonable for us to include in our general plan the entire East Bay Bridge Shopping Center. And we don't need Oakland or the JPA's permission to do that. So the General Plan Steering Committee may, want to say what they think the vision for this center should be, and that could find its way into the general plan.
Michelle, I have a question getting back to the incentives and the JPA and the fact that this particular project is within 2 city jurisdictions. Would the city of Oakland be contributing any incentives to help out the developer on this, or would it be Emeryville? Does Oakland have the facade improvement types of programs, street tree improvements, whatever?
They do have programs. We haven't talked to Oakland yet about it.
But that would be something that would be on the table, I would hope.
Yeah, well, we would certainly discuss that with them. In the development of the center, this Emeryville, back in the 90s, Emeryville really took the lead on it for the most part, though. But I imagine it's in the plan eventually to talk to Oakland, but right now it's the first putting it out there. We don't know the magnitude of what those would be because it would, again, be based on whatever actual proposal the developer puts out. But it's something we'd consider.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Is it fair to say that your proposal is based on an architect's concept of what an area might look like, that's usable and feasible and desirable, but if you did no market study to know whether any of these uses are possible?
No, we did not.
It's not based on a market study of what might be feasible for this area.
It's not based on a market study. However, the uses we are proposing are no different than the uses that are being used in Emeryville in this intensification, residential, for example. And also because we don't have time frames, we're simply, if you take out the residential element of it, the commercial one, we're not increasing it by a huge amount of square footage. What we're saying is, the premise here is simply to go to the developer and say, here are possibilities, here are opportunities. And in fact, it is very possible that in their sort of, their own sort of due diligence of what to do with this, there might be an opportunity that will present itself that could completely change. There could be one big box tenant out of all these that
But has the developer indicated any thoughts about what he thinks would be desirable in the area? Other
Yes,
than saying
they've indicated a support for this plan. They've indicated a support for additional commercial.
those type of uses?
For additional commercial and additional
Okay,
retail
well,
uses.
that's helpful.
And how many meetings have you actually had with?
We've had
Fiona?
one meeting with Catellus, and they've asked us for some follow-up information on fleshing out exactly what's happening, what is entailed with the very questions you asked, the JPA, how are the entitlements going to be processed. And since it's been a little while since we've done that, we're working on that in terms of getting that back to them so we can go back and forth and they can understand
And have they
the full
seen a
scope.
preliminary draft of this vision?
Oh, they've
as
seen
well?
this whole
Good.
thing, yeah. We had a meeting, a sit-down with Sadish, the developer, and myself, and we went through it page
That
by
was
page.
in the last month?
maybe 7 weeks ago. Maybe.
Yeah, something like that.
Okay.
Right before we met with a little bit before we met with the council.
Okay.
When you met with them, did you bring up the trees that need to be replaced on the property?
It looks like a lot of trees going in, according to this plan, anyway.
Yeah, but this is the vision. I'm talking about replacing the trees that they should have already
We
replaced.
certainly have them at that
Well, I
point.
think.
And I
we
know what the
you've missed that
response
history.
that we received before was that you hadn't had a meeting with the property owner, and you have had a meeting with the property owner, so there's no discussion of the current conditions out there.
I
Okay.
didn't work on the trees. I'm sorry.
Well, indirectly, we did show them. I gave you a abbreviated version, but they saw the full thing. We did show them a lot of pictures where there's just not a soul, there's not a shade, there's no tree, and talk to them about the
I'm
fact
sure they
that.
were really disturbed by that, too.
And
Sorry.
And tell them that some things are getting tired in this center. So even if the development around hadn't happened, any center that's as old as this is,
Needs to be rejuvenated.
it needs infusion of improvement.
May I just say that
derelict property.
the initial sort of cosmetic improvements that Sadish has talked about, I think a big part of that was landscaping. And if they come forward with a proposal to do some of these things that they've talked about, we'll make sure that all the existing landscaping is included in that, not just some new landscaping, but that the whole center has
I
good
didn't mean to
landscaping.
put you on the spot, Michelle, but I just sort of felt like, you got to try and find out from these guys what their plans are for properly maintaining their property.
Next time I talk to him, I'll mention the trees.
Well, they
Thank
did
you.
say one thing that I just want to remind all of us. They did express an interest. They asked you about, are there any other sites in Emeryville where we could be brought in to do a mixed-use project? So they're obviously interested in Emeryville. And
They've got 42 acres. What more do they need?
With a lot to do.
Monopoly.
So I'm curious, did you look at, rather than this focus within the parking lot for the landscape cosmetic improvements, did you look at the actual city streets? I mean, those are pathetic in terms of the street tree treatment as well. And rather than putting the money into a private parking lot, it seems like the greatest benefit would be to re-landscape the city's right-of-way. And I'm wondering if that's something that you looked at. I'm looking at the improvement opportunity on sheet 19, and you can see from the aerial how pathetic our street tree landscaping is through there. And, my sense is these uses are all going to change over, and probably the most stable component there is going to be the existing grid system and how we can expand on that.
well, I think that's an excellent point. And what I don't know, Charlie, you can correct me, but the streets, the private property, Emery, for example, that's within their property. That's not a city street.
Oh, no, I think Emery is a city street.
It's Emery's.
Oh,
but-
so Emery is
but-
a city
I
street.
believe so. I'm not clear
What
about
about-
Haven, not Haven. Is that Haven? Harlan. Where Harlan goes through.
Next
And-
to Babies R Us.
Next to
No,
Minnesota.
no. Harlan is between Hollis and San Pablo. It's the one that goes, kind of ends up at Starbucks.
Oh,
The one that runs into the speed table.
I
don't
know
think
it's a
that's
city street between Park Avenue and 40th. It kind of appears to be street-like between 40th and the shopping center, and then beyond that, it turns into a maneuvering aisle. So I'm not clear where the public right-of-way ends there.
Well, I think your point is well taken, because we did also consider the fact, as you can see, we're putting more landscaping on the southern edge of this parking lot, this big parking lot, because one, we think that that'll provide better shade for pedestrians and sidewalk, but the other is we didn't want to propose cosmetic improvements just to be 5 years later or 10 years later taken out for the residential development. So your point about focusing on the streets, be they be private or not, but we know that that fabric will stay. That's a good one, because if those are planted, then those can be protected while the
Right.
densification happens.
yeah, and that's true of Horton and Hollis.
Right.
And the other streets as well. If there are no other questions, then let's see if anyone
Well,
else
can I just ask a quick question? Historically, in your, in looking at the site, did Harlan or Holden or even Watts go through this development at some point way back?
Well, this was the Santa Fe Railroad Yard, and I believe Hollis Street went through into West Oakland, and it crossed a whole lot of railroad tracks in the process. I don't think there were any other streets in this area. In fact, 40th Street wasn't even there.
Way back.
The streets, oh, that's right, thank you. Yerba Buena, I've just been reminded, Yerba Buena did extend from Hollis to San Pablo through the site. That essentially is now the drive aisle in front of Home Depot and CompUSA. That used to be a street. And you know where the gap is between on Dante and Avalon? That area that's a parking lot there? And actually, Yerba Buena Street still exists east of Adeline. But that was Yerba Buena Street, and it was a major transfer point for AC Transit and the Key Route trolleys. They went down Yerba Buena through there.
This is a little hard to see, but this is what looked like before this, the photo that's up. It's what it looked like before the center went up, when it was in use as a,
Industrial site.
industrial site. So a lot of the streets didn't go through because they were using it for
Yeah.
truck depot.
With the exception of Hollis Street,
Yeah, Hollis Street.
all the streets that came south from Park Avenue, Watts, Emery, et cetera, those were all dead-end streets. They just ended at the railroad yard. That's why the north side of 40th Street, a lot of those buildings along there kind of look like the back sides. That's because they were the back sides, and those were railroad sidings that were up against them.
Thanks.
Any other questions before we see if anyone wants to comment? Okay, with that, is there anyone wishing to speak to this item before the commission provides their comments? There's someone behind you there, Satish.
Lisa Findlay, 6019 Christie Avenue. I'd just like to say I think there's one other opportunity, given all the conversations we've had here and General Plan Steering Committee, all of those things about traffic, which is that with Mandela Gateway coming right up to, I think, what we all think of as our back door, it seems really underutilized here as we try to think about other ways of getting people in and out of Emeryville. Just comes up, dead ends right into this property, and I think the JPA, Emeryville, everybody's got to figure out how to connect that through in a constructive way so that people will use it coming in and out of town as well. So right now, I think these plans ignore that, and I really think it should be part of it. Thanks.
Great suggestion. Lisa, can you sign in off to the right there, please?
Over there.
Anyone else wishing to speak to this item? Pass the cookies here. So let's take it back to the commission and have some comments, discussion, before we make a recommendation.
I think like Buzz said, you know, when I was in urban design school, this is kind of an exercise of, you know, utopian vision of this site. And I think that Satish has done a great job of doing that. Looking at the final plan, if everything was done, I walk to Home Depot from the Triangle neighborhood all the time to get goods. It would be great to walk through there and have pedestrian refuges and trellises and extensions to the streets and whatnot. So for a first draft effort, I think he's done a great job. Obviously, this is something that I'm going to be sitting in a rocking chair by the time it's done, and if it's done. But I you know, likening to Commissioner Martin's comments about looking at what we can do now and looking at the right-of-ways and access into the centers is a smart start. And talking to Oakland and getting the developer on board and talking to the big box retailers who probably don't have much incentive in this unless they're going to get some money out of it on a development site. So that's really all my comments.
Other comments?
I really do want to commend Satish on the presentation here. One of the things that was of great value and interest to me, being a planner, is you provided the context for the entire city, where you were showing where all the new development from a residential, commercial perspective is. And so that was just very informative. I think this is a good start, and I understand with what some of my fellow commissioners are saying about what's realistic at this point in time and doing a phasing. But this is a vision, and this is a really important change area in the city, and I think we need to go further. And, you know, I will just bring everyone's attention to a document that was presented to us by Cal and an urban design studio entitled New Open Spaces for Emeryville. And East Bay was one of the sites that they analyzed and came up with, I think, a really creative vision that is intensifying the development there, building it up, and basically eliminating parking lots and coming up with structures and a whole mixed-use concept that incorporates green roofs and a park area. And what I would like for the staff to do with Satish's assistance is we will be looking at this in the General Plan Update Steering Committee, but I think to make it a more successful exercise for the steering committee is if we could have some concepts taking it to that next level, really looking at the visions. And I don't think we're at a point yet, and I don't think we should be at a point yet where we're looking into some of the nuts and bolts of the economics, but look at the vision for that area and how we can relate it to the rest of the city, because it does turn inwards right now, and we need to open it up and create gateways and enhance the pedestrian environment and look at some green space down there. So I would like to see it taken to the next level. And also more trees.
Well, as I said before, when I was in architecture school, we did these kind of schematic things based on what we thought was really nice. But out in the real world, if you plug the economics into it, I think you can be more creative because you then know how things really work. And by leaving the owner of the property out of this process, which is basically what's happened, it's only been one meeting to date, I think that in a way you're sort of treading water, and that it would be more efficient if the city is going to take the lead in being the designer, which apparently is the process at the moment, to bring the property owner into this process as quickly as possible.
Well, if I understood correctly, they are in the process.
They've had one meeting with them, and this is a book that's, a lot
Well,
of
and
study has gone
also,
into.
as we take this, it will be presented to this General Plan Update Steering Committee. I mean, that committee is going to be planning for this area, and those meetings are open to the public. And I agree. I think that the developer has to be an active participant. The property owner has to be an active participant. But I don't think we should limit ourselves to just what the developer might like to see. I think we have to be creative and visionary. We're doing that with the rest of the city. They're a partner, but I don't think we should be limited to that partnership. I think we need to look beyond that.
Well, that would
I
be
think-
saying that we're going to condemn and seize the property.
No, it's
from
not.
them, or
It's just
what?
looking at, they might not even own the property in 20 years,
It's a vision process.
It's a vision.
I think it's perfectly appropriate for us to try to develop a vision of what we'd like to see there. I think that the city staff is working with the owners, the current owners, who may be the owners in the future or who may not. And I think that it's clearly an iterative process. I think it's an excellent first step in moving towards looking at what this area could be. And it's clearly a first step. There are a number of things that need to be resolved and looked at more closely, a number of things that need to be worked out. I think that the residential development creating a street through, I think that having more streets through this area is a positive, but looking at that interface of what's the backside, where's the entries to the buildings going to be, are we going to end up with a one-sided residential street because the Bridgecourt apartments really don't come down to the ground very well on that side, so the front is not a two-sided residential street really either. So there's a lot of working out of the fine details, but I really appreciate the effort that's gone into this to look at intensifying and improving the use. And I think that the photographs that you've included in there of these vast expanses of asphalt without trees and without cars are a perfect, they really point out the need for us to move forward with something like this. I would love to see the property owner move forward with some of the cosmetic items, because I think there's a lot of really simple, quick fixes that could improve the area for pedestrians, that could encourage more people to come, that would make it a nicer place. And I appreciate the fact that you did a two-stage look at it, and I look forward to see the ideas coming forward. I think that Lisa's suggestion about rethinking Mandela Parkway as another front door to this area is really valid. Right now, the design kind of turns its back with the parking structure, and there's an opportunity there that we need to keep our vision glasses on and look forward to.
Art?
I don't want to give the impression that I didn't think it was a nice plan. I think it's a very nice plan, but I may not agree that you should go any further I really would like to see what the developer says. To me, I think we will get to the nuts and bolts of it when we get the developer's input. I think the next stage is to encourage the developer to come forward and say what he thinks about the plan. I think it has great potential, but without him, I don't think we're going to go very far. So that would be my comment.
Thanks, Art. Angela?
Well, I have to say, a lot of the questions from the commission surprised me because I thought I heard those answers in your presentations. I thought it was pretty thorough. I thought you had a lot of very good considerations about involving the developer, a realistic look at the fact that this is just a vision right now and it's just ideas, but the fact that the developer is interested is really good. So I think the next step would be to have more talks, work out what it is the developer envisions and how they align with what you've got here. Thanks.
My comments, cosmetic enhancements, I think, as Gail and Patty have said, there are some simple things that can be done quickly, including this property owner in the facade grant program probably is one of them. I don't think it makes sense to do the landscape improvements that you've suggested and laid out in the improvement opportunities sheet. I see all those parking lots getting reused. I see the tilt-up eventually getting reused. I certainly hope that is the case. And I think all of that effort really should be focused on the existing street grid system. I think the plaza area between Home Depot and Starbucks is an interesting one and something they could easily accommodate there and would help separate out and maybe even hide some of that storage use between the two buildings there. I don't think it makes sense to extend that trellis system from that plaza north. That's quite a distance there. We had to drop the trellis out of the greenway around maybe 20 to 50 foot length because it was too expensive, and I would be very frustrated to see a trellis subsidized by the city going into a place that it's never really going to be used, frankly, as interesting as it might be. And I think a lot of this really is in the developer's lap, and I would agree that we really need to hear back from them before we take another step in refining this plan, both in terms of the cosmetic enhancements and the development opportunities. I have some real concerns about the development opportunities and the way they're laid out. I think you've missed the excellent point about extension of Mandela. The development opportunities should be built around the ultimate street network that we want to see there and how that contributes to improved pedestrian circulation. And I don't see that in the uses that you've suggested or in the layout of the street network and the associated parking. I think some of the existing problems where you've got a dead space facing the parking lots is going to continue in the layout that you suggested. The lack of activation on some of those streets is going to continue. Some of it's unrealistic, and I think you caught that in at least one of the options in creating a parking structure next to Pack and Save or Safeway. It's not going to work. So I do not want to see this development opportunity component of this vision going to the steering committee at this point. I don't want this to become the preliminary footprint to what the commission or the council has endorsed for this area. I think it's got too much work before it's handed to the steering committee. There are just too many questions about interfacing use and how we're really going to end up with something that is a vibrant center, which is what I believe we want to see there. And I don't think adding pods of additional massive buildings, regardless of how they're articulated, but in my impression, planted without regard to the ultimate road and pedestrian network system through here makes sense. I think you've planted large development pods on existing street frontages, and corners of parking lot, rather than looking at what the grid is really going to be through here. And the plan from the students at UC Berkeley really looked at the street grid system through here in a completely different way and alignment. And I think it's important to take a look at that, because I thought it was really impressive, and incredible detail went into their analysis. I don't know how much you've looked at that, Sadish, but it's at least an option that should be looked at in terms of the development opportunities here. And something that I would rather see carried forward to the steering committee, rather than an attempt to try to improve something that ultimately I think is going to get bulldozed in a large way at some point in the future.
All those tilt-ups will
Yeah.
hopefully be all gone.
Right. And I don't think we should be building the use right around those. I think we should look at the grid system we want to see and lay it out in that regard. And Mandela Parkway should be extended at least to Hollis, and there should be a strong invitation, both going and coming, from that major road system. And the uses along that should be encouraging activation. So I appreciate all the effort, and you've heard a wide range of comments from the commission. And maybe, Michelle, you can describe to us what the next steps are here for this vision process?
Well, the next steps are based on comments we received both from Planning Commission, the developer, which I'll need to talk to him a little bit more about, as well as from the agency. We're going to see if we're going to revise the plans to get a little bit better of idea, because again, this is a vision, and we will refine the information that he asked for, the developer asked for, in terms of understanding a little bit more the process so he can understand his costs. And then we'll just sort of go through the process of working out something that will get them more money, so they'll want to do it, and we'll get something that we want, so that all the parties will benefit. It's maybe not rocking chair time, but
So I
It'll
would
be-
like either from you or through Charlie a periodic update on this process. This is a large endeavor that the city's taking on. It's great that we're trying to provide incentives to see something happen here and kickstart something to bring some vitality to that area. So
Well,
I would prefer that we have some periodic process to hear how it's going, how things are going with the applicant and property owner, and where the next step ends up being in terms of refinement for this plan, rather than all of a sudden being presented with the refined plan. Does that make sense, Charlie?
Yeah, we can certainly do that. And in addition, as I mentioned in my director's report about the general plan process, once the steering committee develops a preferred plan for the city, we will convene a joint meeting of the Planning Commission and the City Council to look at the overall picture of the whole city, and I'm sure this will be a major component of that vision. That's kind of separate, but hopefully compatible with what this study is doing. And but we can certainly come back and provide you, say, quarterly updates or whatever on how
Does
this
that
is
sound
going.
I
Good
think
to the
that's a
rest of
good
the
idea.
I
commission?
think that makes
Okay.
sense.
Yeah.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sadish and Michelle. Do we want to take a 5-minute break? Or, okay, we're going to take a 5-minute break, and we'll reconvene at 8:05.